Picture a cattle ranch. You're already seeing it, right? The fence line, the herd, a guy in a hat squinting at the horizon. And in your head, that's a business. Cows go in, beef comes out, money gets made. That's the story everybody believes, and it's the story the ranch owner is very, very happy for you to believe. Because here's what's actually going on. On a lot of these places, the cattle aren't the business. The cattle are the cover. They're the price of admission to a game that has almost nothing to do with beef, and almost everything to do with land, taxes, and a set of rules most people have never even heard of. And once you see how this machine works, you'll never look at a herd of cows the same way again. So let's start with the part that sounds insane. On a huge number of ranches, the cattle operation loses money. Not has a bad year loses money. Loses money as a structural, baked-in, on-purpose feature. There's an old economic study of family-sized cattle ranches that walked through the numbers on a representative operation and landed on a true net return of negative $28,000. Negative. And that wasn't some freak accident. Rates of return on ranch investments have historically run lower than almost any other place you could park your money. Beef prices creep up 11% over a decade, while the cost of running the place jumps 60%. The math just doesn't beef its way to profit, so your obvious question is the right one. If the cows lose money, why does anyone keep the cows? Why does anyone do this at all? Hold that thought. Because the answer is the whole video. Let's build it up one layer at a time. The simple way. Forget cattle for a second. Imagine you own a big piece of empty land on the edge of a growing city. Just dirt. That dirt is worth, let's say, $50 million because a developer would kill to build houses on it. Now, how does the county tax you? The county looks at what that land is worth on the open market, $50 million, and sends you a property tax bill based on that number. In a high-tax state, that bill could be brutal. Hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, every year, just for holding the dirt. That tax bill is the enemy. That's the thing eating you alive while you wait for the land to go up in value. So the whole game becomes, how do I make that tax bill disappear without selling the land? And this is where the cows walk onto the stage. Almost every state has something called an agricultural exemption. The idea behind it was genuinely good. Lawmakers didn't want a family farm getting taxed into oblivion just because a suburb grew up next door and made their land theoretically valuable to developers. So they wrote a rule. If your land is used for agriculture, we won't tax it on what it could sell for. We'll tax it on what it could earn as a farm. And those two numbers are worlds apart. Land that's worth $50 million to a developer might only earn a few $1,000s a year grazing cattle, so the taxable value doesn't drop a little, it craters. Now watch how the rich turn that safety net into a trampoline. You don't need to be a farmer. You just need your land to qualify as agricultural. And in a lot of places, the bar for that is almost comically low. You put a few cows on it, that's it. The cows aren't there to make money. The cows are there to be evidence. They're a legal costume your land wears so it can qualify for the farm rate. In California, people literally call it the two-cow loophole. Put a token number of animals on the property, or lease the grazing rights to someone who will, and your assessment drops off a cliff. Let me give you the numbers, because the numbers are where this stops being abstract and starts being outrageous. Michael Dell, the computer guy, one of the richest men in America, had a ranch property near Austin. On the open market, the home and land were valued at $71.4 million. After it got treated as agricultural, the taxable value came in at $290,000. Read that again. $71 million of real estate taxed as if it were worth less than a starter home in a lot of American cities. And this isn't one guy. Back in the 70s, Ronald Reagan got an ag exemption on a Santa Barbara ranch and watched his tax bill fall from around $12,600 to $1,100 on land one wire report described as too rugged for serious ranching and almost impossible to farm. George W. Bush's ranch in Crawford, Texas had its taxable value cut from over $2 million to under $1 million. Disney World put some cows and a few trees on undeveloped land next to the theme park and paid the farm rate while it sat on the property waiting to develop it. And then there's the one that tells you the whole thing is theater. A Trump golf course in New Jersey kept a herd of goats, 12 goats, on part of the property, called it a farm, and shaved roughly $257,000 off its tax bill every single year. 12 goats. That's the cover charge. That's the entire agricultural operation. A dozen goats standing on a golf course worth a fortune, doing the legal work of turning a luxury property into a farm. Now here's the part that should make you sit up, because it's the part nobody mentions. When a billionaire's estate pays the farm rate instead of the real rate, that money doesn't just vanish into thin air. Somebody makes up the difference. There's a governor in Montana whose home carries an agricultural designation, and the effective tax rate on that land works out to somewhere around 1/144th of what a neighbor pays across the street. 1/144. Your neighbor pays $144 in land tax for every dollar you pay. Investigations in Montana found thousands of million-dollar homes claiming farm status, and the threshold to qualify, $1,500 a year of agricultural income, hadn't been updated since the 1980s. The shortfall lands on everyone else's bill. The regular homeowners in the county quietly subsidize the guy with the private ranch and the token herd. Okay, so that's layer one. The cows are a tax costume, and the costume is cheap. But we still haven't answered the real question. Why buy the land in the first place if the cattle lose money and the whole point is just to shrink a tax bill? Shrinking a tax bill on a money-losing asset isn't a business, so what's the actual play? The actual play is the land itself, because while the cattle operation is bleeding a few $1,000s a year, the ground underneath those cattle is doing something completely different. It's appreciating, quietly, relentlessly, decade after decade. American farmland, measured by the big benchmark index, has returned somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% a year over the long run once you combine the modest income with the appreciation. And the appreciation is the engine. Land near growing cities, land with mountain views, land with water, it goes up. There's a story of a guy who owned a 40-acre parcel in Idaho, made over 10% a year on it for a decade, and almost none of that return came from farming. It came from the view, from the location, from the dirt getting more valuable while cows wandered around on top of it, technically losing money and legally qualifying the whole thing for the farm tax rate. So now stack the two layers and look at what you've built. You own an asset that's steadily climbing in value. You've used a handful of cows to knock the annual carrying cost, the property tax, down to almost nothing. So you get to hold this appreciating asset for pennies while it does the heavy lifting. The cattle lose you a little. The tax exemption saves you a lot. And the land makes you a fortune. The cows aren't the business. The cows are what makes the business possible. But there's still one more level to this, and it's the one that gets into real money and real controversy. It's called a conservation easement. Here's the simple version. You own land. You sign away your right to ever develop it. You promise, permanently, that no one will build on it. Because you've given up something valuable, that lost development potential, the government hands you a charitable tax deduction for it. In its honest form, this is a genuinely good tool. A real rancher who wants to keep the family land wild forever gives up the right to sell to a developer and gets a tax break for protecting open space. Fine. Beautiful, even. Now here's how it got weaponized. A version of this called a syndicated conservation easement turned into an industrial-scale tax factory. Promoters would round up a group of investors, buy a piece of land, then get it appraised at some wildly inflated value, claiming the development rights were worth far, far more than anyone actually paid. Then they donate the easement and split up a giant deduction. In one case, the courts looked at, investors bought 165 acres for around $585,000 and turned around and claimed a charitable deduction of over $12 million. Buy for $500,000, deduct $12 million. That's not conservation, that's alchemy, And this wasn't fringe. A bipartisan Senate investigation found these deals generated something like $26.8 billion in unjustified tax deductions flowing to high-income taxpayers over just a handful of years. The Senate report called them what they were: retail tax shelters that let people buy tax deductions off a shelf. The IRS has been grinding through more than 1,000 of these cases. Judges have been throwing them out with language you rarely see in a tax opinion. One court called a deal an outrageous overstatement untethered from reality. Promoters have gone to prison. The point isn't that every easement is a scam. Most aren't. The point is that the same basic move, land plus a tax rule, equals a fortune, kept showing up, dressed in different clothes. So let's zoom all the way out, because now you can see the whole board. Look at who's actually buying enormous amounts of American land right now. As of early 2026, the largest private landowner in the country is Stan Kroenke, the guy who owns the LA Rams and Arsenal, sitting on around 2.7 million acres after buying nearly 1 million acres of ranch land in a single deal. Ted Turner owns around 2 million acres and runs the largest private bison herd on Earth. Jeff Bezos holds over 460,000 acres in West Texas, where the ranch happens to share space with a rocket launch site. Bill Gates has quietly become the biggest private farmland owner in America, with something like 275,000 acres across more than a dozen states. Now, are these people running these places to get rich off cattle and crops? Of course not. For a billionaire, the operating income off the land is a rounding error. The land is the point. It's a tangible, finite, appreciating asset that doesn't crash the way a stock can, that comes wrapped in favorable tax treatment, that can be passed to heirs, and that quietly grows more valuable every year they hold it. The agriculture, the cattle, the crops, the bison is partly real work and partly the thing that keeps the tax machine running underneath. And that's the whole trick. When you drive past a ranch now, you're not looking at a beef business with some land attached. A lot of the time, you're looking at a land appreciation play with a tax shelter built in, and a few cows standing out front as the cover charge. The herd isn't there to make money. The herd is there to make money possible. So the next time somebody tells you they're in the cattle business, ask them a simple question. Ask them whether the cows make money, or whether the cows are just what lets the land make money. Because now you know there's a difference, and once you can see that difference, you start noticing this exact move everywhere the truly wealthy park their money. Find the asset that quietly goes up, then find the rule that lets you hold it for almost nothing. The cattle were never the point. They were just the price of the ticket. If that reframed how you see a fence line and a herd, you already understand this better than most people ever will, and there's a whole world of these hiding in plain sight money machines once you start looking.